Let's get started. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here. My name is Rich Lyons. I'm the dean of our Haas School. When David Aaker retired in 2001, we wanted to make sure that future generations of Haas students and the whole Haas community, for that matter, could benefit from his insights. We launched at that time the David Aaker Distinguished Lecture Series in Marketing. The lecture is co-sponsored by the Dean Speaker Series. Many of you have been coming to our series. It is also co-sponsored by the Haas MBA Marketing Club and also the Undergraduate Marketing Association. And I see many of the students in both of those associations here today. Thank you for being here. It's no wonder, because the opportunity to hear from Dave, who is obviously one of the world's leading marketing experts, is a very big opportunity indeed. He returns to Haas every year to share his expertise in the marketing area more generally, and that expertise continues to evolve. He has written 15 books, many articles on the topic. His most recent book on spanning silos. He is really pushing thinking in brand and marketing more generally along so many different boundaries. And breaking these spanning silos and breaking those boundaries is a topic that runs through many of his books and his works. Today he's going to be focusing on tracking brands in Japan. He just returned from a trip to Japan. He was there last week. He spent 10 years tracking over 1,000 brands in Japan. His goal was to determine why some brands are consistently stronger than others in Japan, the kinds of brands that we're all familiar with, whether it's a Panasonic or a Sony or a Toyota or even a Disney, a more U.S. at least initiated brand. We're honored to learn about those findings today. We all look forward to them. We're proud to have David as a member of our Berkeley community. He was a faculty here since 1968. He's currently the E.T. Grether Professor of Marketing Emeritus. He serves as Vice Chairman of Profit Brand Strategies, a San Francisco consulting firm founded by two of our Haas graduates. They were greatly influenced by his teaching. Scott Galloway is one of them. Scott is currently on our Haas board. And also Ian Chaplin, both of them MBA 1992. David received his BS degree from MIT. His MS and PhD degrees are from Stanford. I want to thank David on behalf of our entire school for his generosity in speaking to us today. Thank you for helping me welcome our friend and our colleague, David Aaker.
Thank you, Rich. Well, I can't tell you how lucky we are to have Rich Lyons as dean. He's really an extraordinary talent, and I was just delighted to know that I've been elevated to the Dean Speaker Series. This is a first time, and I take that as a great compliment. I'm going to talk about brands in Japan. We have a lot to learn from a database that we've developed over there over the course of the last 10 years. We've measured some 1,000 brands for 10 years. Let me, though, start out with a story and talk a little bit about a brand called Mooji. Mooji started in 1983 as a private label of a department store in Japan, and about 6 years later it broke off as a separate company. But in 1983, they also, soon after their private label experience, opened a store. Now they have something like 330 stores in 10 countries. They are extremely unique. In our tracking study, they're always in the top 30. This is out of 1,000 brands. They're always in the top 30 and usually in the top 20. Mooji stands for simplicity, moderation, self-restraint, and natural. Simplicity, moderation, self-restraint, natural. I mean, and you walk into a Mooji store. How many have been in a Mooji store? You walk in there, there's usually soft music, it's calm. The clothes are beige. Some are dark beige, some are light beige. There's no yellow, there's no red, there's no purple. It's the opposite of Abercrombie and Fitch. There's sort of a calmness. You just feel calm. You look at the furniture. Furniture is beige. And it's simple furniture. It's not, you don't look at it and say, boy, is that fancy and clever and luxurious. It's very simple, very functional. You look at the houseware, the dishes, and so forth. You look at the appliances, all simple, all functional, and therefore very reasonably priced. About 6 or 7 years after they opened their first store, they opened their first campgrounds. They now have 3 large campgrounds. And the campgrounds are very natural and very simple. They've gone to great lengths to restore, to keep the natural environment. And of course, their clothing is natural and organic and on and on. They don't have labels. I mean, why do you need a label in your clothing? So, it's really, Mooji is really the anti-Ginza glitz. I mean, it's anti-everything. It's saying that you don't need self-expressive benefits when you buy things. You don't need it. You just need function, right? You just need, and they talk about best is enough. It's just enough. Doesn't mean they compromise. It just means it's enough. We don't have to have more. I have a friend from Norway who talks about their Norwegian, attitude. It's enough. We don't have to have yachts, and we don't have to have private planes. It's enough. And we can be happy that way, and that's Mooji. It's very much a lifestyle brand. And ironically, and actually, Mooji Rishu Roman is the whole name of Mooji, and it means a no brand. It's a no brand. I mean, that's what they are. They're not a brand. This anti-brand brand that doesn't deliver self-expressive benefits, ironically, delivers more self-expressive benefits than probably any other brand. Because people that buy there and like to shop there are making a statement about themselves. They're saying something about themselves. They're saying, I don't need, Louis Vuitton. I don't need the Gucci thing. I don't need Ginza. And so ironically, this no brand is one of the strongest brands in Japan and delivers the strongest self-expressive benefits. It really connects. It shares values and a lifestyle and so on with its customers. And actually, I was walking down Ginza last week, and what did I find? They've just opened a store in the Ginza. Now, how ironic is that? So this decade of effort, we've measured 1,000 brands. We have about 20 measures we've developed that survey customers. Last year we surveyed 35,000 customers or consumers. And we have some personality variables and other variables, things like friendliness, innovativeness, how much you know the brand, the quality, the charm, the aggressive. And then we also surveyed businessmen, basically asking how strong a business brand is this. And we asked questions like, is it one of the foremost brands? Is it a visionary? Is it successful? Is it good management? Would you want to work there? And so on, things like that. So we have these 2 databases that we track every year. And every year I read a little piece, sort of commenting on that year's results. It's really an asset to have this database. And we can study the health of brands in general. We can look at what brands are strong, and we can diagnose why they're strong. We can study the dynamics. We can look at the changes from year to year, and what brand has changed how and why. And we can find role models. So if you want to become more innovative, you can look in the database to see who is perceived as innovative, and also brands that have changed on that dimension a lot. And then you can try to see why they did it, and you can learn from that. Well, so what have we learned? One of the major findings is that brand equity is very stable over time. In fact, it's extraordinarily stable. If you look at the brands that have been in the top 20 in the consumer database, every single year, it's Disney, Sonia Ghibli. Sonia Ghibli is like Pixar. They make animated films, and they're just as successful as Pixar in Japan. Panasonic and Sony. But it's kind of interesting. Studio Ghibli is always a top 10 brand or top 15. Pixar would not be in the States a top brand. I mean, everybody knows toys and there are other movies, but Pixar is not a big consumer brand, but in Japan it is. Disney and Sony for many years were neck and neck for #1 in Japan. And then if we go 8 years, we have Tokyo Hands and Nissan. Nissan makes noodles. I'll talk more about that brand. In 7 years, we have Mooji and Windows. 6 years, Uniqlo, another retailer I'll talk about, Toyota, Sharp, and Yahoo. 5 years, we had 7-Eleven, Canon, Fuji TV, Kirin, Google, and National. In 10 years, there's only been one brand that's broken into this top echelon. One brand. And that's Nintendo. And I'll talk more about that later. But it's extraordinary. 10 years and only one brand is broken. I mean, every year you open the same brands. I mean, they change a little bit. 1,000 brands, always the same in the top 20. Actually, if you look at this, there's 4 retail brands that are always in the top 20. And it's kind of unintuitive. You should find them there. And there's Tokyo Hands. I'll talk about that later as well. Mooji, Uniqlo, which is kind of a low-end Gap, and 7-Eleven. These brands tended to fall into 4 different categories. Electronics, where there's a lot of new product vitality. Entertainment, where there's a lot of involvement. Retail, where there's a lot of differentiation. And food and drinks, where there's a lot of usage and loyalty. If you look at the business data, it's even more staggering. Every single year, these 4 brands were in the top 6. Every single year. Now, I think that what's going on here is that Toyota and Honda kind of represent one driver of Japanese economic prosperity over the years, and Panasonic and Sony represent the second. And I think they're kind of representative of their business area. If you look at the top 20 every year, you add Microsoft, Canon, Nintendo, and Sharp. If you look in the top 26 plus years, you add Centauri, Apple, Nissan, and Oriental Land. Oriental Land owns Disney, the Disney properties. So, in summary, you have 25 or 30 brands that dominate the top echelon of brands. Again, out of 1,000 brands, this top 20, 30 brands, 25, 30 brands always appear in the top, 20, 30, 40 brands every year. There's just not much space for new brands to enter. And I think that it's just extraordinary. I never would have predicted that. I would have thought there'd be much more year-to-year variation in brand strength. But there really isn't. And so what are the implications of that? Well, one implication is value, the brand equity is based on the experience over decades. I mean, take Sony. Sony this year is the #6 brand in Japan. This year. Sony hasn't had a major innovation in 25 years, or 20 years at least. I mean, they missed cell phones, they missed flat screen TVs, they missed on and on and on. They missed the iPod. Actually, they came out with the iPod 2 years before Apple did, but they screwed it up. They came up with 2 versions, they had 2 silos, and they had Sony Music that blocked both of them. But they lost and lost and lost, and they're still the #6 brand. So what you see here is enormous momentum. And what you see is kind of a 1980s effect, 90s effect. And so what you've got to understand is brand equity is a long-term deal. It's not something that you can change from year to year. And the second thing is the value of the brands persists. That means an investment you make now can have payoff. You know, and of course in our world, the earnings per share and the short-term profits, but we're talking about building investments that can pay off for decades. And this really demonstrates that pretty vividly. And finally, brands are hard to destroy. If you get a great brand, it's really hard to destroy it. You know, look at Apple had 5 or 6 bad years, and the Apple brand was not destroyed. The company faltered, but not the brand. Harley had some really terrible years. They were putting out junk. And the business faltered, but not the brand. Look at AT&T. AT&T spent 20 years doing everything imaginable to destroy that brand. And today, it's probably the strongest brand in the telecommunications space. Okay, and then why? Why are these strong brands strong? I tried to identify kind of 6 themes that run through this database. And all these brands don't have all 6 of these dimensions, but they usually have 4 or 5 of them at least. So let's look at the first one, which is a loyal customer base. And there's a lot of kinds of loyalty that's going on here. One is that the consumers like the brand. They like it because it delivers benefits. It delivers functional benefits, delivers self-expressive benefits, it delivers social benefits, emotional benefits. So the brand delivers. I think that all these brands have a high level of quality, perceived quality. And there's a habit effect. I mean, people are satisfied. They find there's no reason to change. And so let's just keep using it. And that's an enormously powerful element. And they're familiar. And people like the familiar. It's really extraordinary. They like the same way they take to work. They like the way they got their desk set up. They like their favorite TV shows. They like the familiar. Psychologists have done research on nonsense words. I mean, words that don't mean a thing. And you can take some nonsense words, and if you expose some nonsense words 8 times and others only 2 times, people have a strong preference for the ones they've seen more often, the ones that are more familiar. They like brands they respect. They like to do business with people and companies that they respect and admire. Now this loyalty effect is particularly true for the packaged goods. And most of the brands in the packaged goods space that are on the list, like Kirin, Coca-Cola, Suntory, and Cup Noodle, have a really high level of people are familiar with them, people like them, people use them, and so forth. These are all high market share brands. So the reason that this drives them to the top of the set and not their competitors is they're simply bigger. And so it's kind of a vicious circle. These things that are bigger have more visibility, more loyalty, and then they get bigger still. And the brand gets stronger. So there's a lot to be said for being number one. But it also applies to some brands that aren't packaged goods, like some retail brands like McDonald's. You steal the same kind of thing, the familiarity, the habit, the liking, and with Google. Again, you get used to using it, that you like it, it delivers for you, It doesn't disappoint, and so you get a lot of habit effect. There's a concept that I've been working with for a while called brand relevance. And actually that's the subject of my next book that will be out next January, Brand Relevance. And the basic idea is that when people have a decision process that starts with choosing the kind of product category that they want to buy, it might be an SUV, and then they decide what brands they're going to consider. It might be a Lexus, BMW, and Mercedes. And then they select the brand to buy. It might be Mercedes. And my observation has been that we in marketing spend way, way, way too much time on brand preference. We worry too much on how can we make our brand different and better than other brands so that customers will choose it. And we spend way too little on brand relevance. But the real payoff is to create a product category or subcategory that's desirable for the customers, and then be the only brand that's relevant. So now you don't have to worry about competitors because they're not. I mean, Cirque du Soleil doesn't worry about Barnum and Bailey. They're just not relevant to them. And, you know, Prius doesn't have to worry about the subcompacts because they're not relevant. Because once you choose a hybrid, then they're not relevant to you anymore. So and this loyalty and visibility option has a great deal of determination as to what brands you consider and what brands you don't consider. So it has a lot to do with the relevance thing. A second thing is quality. You know, I think all these brands have high perceived quality. And I've done about 5 statistical studies in which I try to determine the impact of brand equity on ROI and stock return and market share. And what I found is that brand equity, by whatever measure, has a dramatic effect on financial outcomes. Almost as much effect on stock return as accounting ROI does, as a matter of fact. But in one of our studies, we used as our measure of brand equity perceived quality. And we showed that perceived quality drove market share and it drove price. And as a result of that, it drove ROI. So perceived quality really matters. Perceived quality is kind of also a variable that reflects kind of a halo effect. If you're good on perceived quality, you're probably good on a lot of the relevant dimensions for a product class. So if you look at Canon and Sony, 2 of the strong brands, they have really delivered really acceptable or even exceptional quality over a long period of time. And I think that's one of the reasons that Sony maintains this momentum of being one of the strong brands. It's because their quality is really outstanding. You can depend on Sony and you can Canon as well. Now quality can have sort of a different perspectives. If you take McDonald's, which is one of the top brands in this group, if you take McDonald's, they deliver quality, they deliver value. I mean, one of the most inexpensive meals you can get in Japan is at McDonald's. They have a 100 yen burger, which is about $1 burger. And they have, you know, cleanliness, they're fresh, they're hot, they're everywhere, they're so convenient that they deliver quality, but so does Mossburger. Mossburger is a Japanese brand, and they have much more variety. And they're much more tailored to the Japanese. They have a rice burger, where instead of bread, you have rice. They also are very organic. The meat is very safe. They track where the meat comes from, so you can be sure that it's extremely safe, so they're much more expensive than McDonald's, but they also deliver quality. And then there's 7-Eleven. I mean, 7-Eleven is a convenience store. What's a convenience store doing is one of these major brands in Japan, one of these 4 retail brands that are always in the top 20 or 30. 7-Eleven. Well, it turns out that 7-Eleven is a different company than it is in the States. 7-Eleven in the States got into financial trouble and they sold off the Japanese operation. And 7-Eleven in Japan is extraordinary. Just to give you an example, their lettuce. They have low temperature storage, they have a transportation system that from field to store, and they generate really fresh, crisp lettuce. This is 7-Eleven. They have freshly baked bread they deliver 3 times a day to 13,000 7-Eleven things. Can you imagine can you imagine the logistics of delivering 3 times a day fresh bread to 7-Eleven? They have a chocolate, a private label chocolate. They use the same ingredient as Godiva does in their chocolate. It's comparable. They have a cake that's won medals as being the best sort of packaged cake. And this is sort of the story of 7-Eleven. It's just, for a convenience store, it's got over-the-top quality, and they have a lot of new product vitality, too. They have a private label program with always new products, and it's really a cut above their competitors. Can you imagine having AM PM, which is big over there as well, Lawson's, and trying to compete with 7-Eleven? But it's all about quality. Well, third theme is success. You know, I think it's no question that brand equity drives success. But it's, for a lot of reasons. But success also drives brand equity. I did a study once of a database that was based on the Fortune Admire stuff, and people were showing that, if you advertise in Fortune, then you would get you'd have a higher brand. And what we got into the data, we found that what was actually going on is that stock market success was driving brand perceptions. Success was driving the brand among the Fortune audience members. So when we do statistical analysis, we have to make sure the direction of correlation is dealt with, and we do that with lag variables and so on. But there's no question that market success drives brand. One of the strongest brands in America is GE. Jack Welch for 20 years never advertised GE. And I don't know exactly why, but anyway, that was his viewpoint. But GE's market success and the business success created a strong brand. And, if you're a successful business, that implies you must be making something that has high quality. It implies that you must also have reliability, and you must be delivering value. In the business survey in Japan, the top 4 brands, as I mentioned, are Toyota, Panasonic, Honda, and Sony. And I think that there's no question that the reason that those brands are strong is because of their market success. This isn't a business survey. And like I mentioned in the Fortune Reader survey, same thing applies here. For businessmen, the success of the company is driving their impression of the brand. Just as an aside, if you look at the most admired companies in the Fortune survey, if you look at the top 50, there are 8 non-US brands. 4 are from Europe, 1 is from Korea, Samsung, and 3 are from Japan. And those 3 are This was done just before the Toyota incident, anyway. Toyota, Honda, and Sony. Honda's 36, Sony's 38, and Toyota's 7. And so all these numbers, I think, are based on their market success in the States, too. Now, Panasonic, I think, in the States, again, suffers from this 80s phenomenon. In the 80s, Panasonic was not a strong consumer electronics brand, relatively speaking, and it still reflects that. Then there's vision. I think that a lot of these brands have a good business vision. They really know what they stand for. They understand their business model, and so forth. And what a business vision gives you is shared values, interests, and lifestyle. So it's a basis of connecting at a very deep, fundamental level with the customers. And but it requires that you not only have a vision, but this vision be visible to people. So you look at some of these top brands, and you look at Google, and it has this really incredible vision: build the best search engine. And Google has these 10 principles. Fast is better than slow, and great is better than not being great, or something. I don't have them memorized, but put the user in first place, and everything will turn out. But look at the Google homepage, all that white space. Can you imagine there's no other company that's been able to resist filling up that white space. But fast is better than slow. Anything else is going to slow you up, and so forth. You look at Nike, bring inspiration and motivation to every athlete. So it's a vision that's very inspirational, very connecting. And Tokyo Hands. I mentioned these 4 retailers. One of them was Tokyo Hands. Tokyo Hands is kind of it's a large do-it-yourself thing. It's sort of a combination of Home Depot and a craft shop and a game shop and probably a few other things. So anything you want to do with your hands, you can go to Tokyo Hands. And you walk through Tokyo Hands, and it's an amazing experience. You just say, wow, I didn't know anybody made that. I mean, you say again and again and again, all these incredible things, and they're all things you do with your hands. Now, I mean, there is no, I think, brand on earth that a customer can be more involved with. I mean, it's all about, doing it yourself. And Tokyo Hands is not only your partner, but it's your inspiration. Not only because of their vision, but because of all the cool things they have. It's just a fun adventure to go there. And then I talked about Mooji: simplicity, moderation, self-restraint. Can you imagine a brand standing for self-restraint? And then we have a set of brands in Japan that have visible environmental programs. Now, the first 2 brands, by a big margin, I must say, in Japan on this dimension is Toyota and Panasonic. Toyota, because of the Prius, largely, I would say, but Panasonic has really dedicated themselves 4 years ago to becoming the leading environmental brand in Japan. They first of all, have, like GE has, really become a green business. So they have incredible programs in batteries. In fact, they bought Sanyo because of their battery technology. They have what they call ecosystems for homes. So they have a system, kind of like a Honeywell system, that manages your home to optimize your energy. And it just goes on and on. They have appliances. You can go to a Panasonic home display and see their appliances, and everything is geared to saving CO2 emissions. And then they have a program with aggressive objectives to reduce their CO2 in their factories. And most amazing of all, they have an explicit objective to get everybody in the world onto the environmental train. It's most extraordinary. They call them these eco-ideas. And they have eco-ideas for everybody. And they sort of are spreading the word. And so they've taken on themselves to change the world, person by person. Just as a total aside, politicians in countries seem to struggle with, program. How do you get, energy conservation? How do you get energy independent? How do you address the CO2 program? And it from the outsider looking in, it seems like a lot of paralysis and not much going on. But you look at commercial companies like GE and Panasonic, and you can go on and on and on. So many of them have aggressive, positive programs that are really making a difference. I mean, what Walmart's doing is just so impressive. And here they were sort of a holdout, but in 3 years they've really changed. So it's really, I think, a credit to the business community that they've taken such a leadership role. And then there's innovation. I think all these firms are incredibly innovative. And innovation does a lot of things. It gives you energy. It adds value to offerings. And then back to my relevance thing, it can serve to create new categories or subcategories that will make competitors irrelevant. So innovation is got to be a driver. And I talked about the fact there was one brand in this in the whole Japanese 1,000 brand database that was able to break through. And that was Nintendo. And I think this is the most phenomenal brand story of the last 10 years, without question. In 2005, Nintendo was the 135 brand in Japan. The difference between 135 and 635 is very low, very little. So they're kind of a middle of the 1,000 database brand. In 2006, they moved to 66, 2007, 5, 2008, number 1 by a big margin, 2009, number 1, and this year, 14. Their brand DS went from 250 to 8 to 5 to 6 to 6, and the brand Wii went from 54 to 17 to 19. This year, 3 of the brands of the top 20, 15% of the top 20 brands in Japan are Nintendo brands. I mean, that is just phenomenal. And how did they do this? I mean, what was their nature of their innovation? Well, if you can check me on this, actually. But my analysis is that when Microsoft and Sony were doing the conventional marketing thing, they were looking at the heavy user. And who is the heavy user? It was young males. And what does a heavy user want? Is really super graphics and action games. And that's what they were delivering. And they were really competing tooth and nail on that dimension for that audience. So what did Nintendo do? They said, well, we're not going to compete on graphics. We'll do okay graphics. But we're not going to compete with Sony and Microsoft. And we're going to let them have the heavy user. We're going to go after girls, mothers, families, and they can control the action games. We're going to provide, games that are easy to use. And we're going to have games that are active. We'll have exercise games. We'll have educational games. We'll have involving games like, of course, on Wii you can play golf and you can bowl and play baseball and you can skip rocks on water and so forth. All very involving games. And so that was their tact. And they pulled it off. And so they completely changed the industry. They created a whole new subcategory, which they have dominated for years. And that resulted in them shooting to the top of this survey. And again, given the stability of the identity of those brands, that was really an extraordinary event. But you look at all these brands. Now, there's one really interesting brand that's always a top brand, and I've struggled to figure out why. And that's a brand called Nissin. And they have a product brand called Cup of Noodle. It's a noodle company. I mean, why should a noodle company be one of the strongest brands in Japan? I mean, Kao is not there. Shiseido is not there. But Nissan is. And, but one reason is so innovative. First of all, they come out with Cup of Noodle, which was a breakthrough innovation. But it's still noodles. But not only do they come out with Cup of Noodles, but they remind you all the time that they invented Cup of Noodles. They always bring it up. It's not, I mean, most people would do Cup of Noodles and fine, that was 2 years ago, what are we doing now? Not them, they're always talking about Cup of Noodles. In fact, their mantra is to beat Cup of Noodles. I mean, their innovation aspiration is to do that again. And everybody knows that. And they come out with 250 new products a year. Nissan does. And so the brand Nissan, which is the company, is one of the strongest brands, and Cup of Noodle isn't far behind. You have Sharp with Aquos, the TV thing, and now they've come out with Quadran Quad Pixie. They've added yellow to TV sets, which is a dramatic breakthrough in TV set quality. And it's a kind of innovation that Sony had in the 80s. And then we have Uniqlo. I said Uniqlo is a sort of a downscale Gap. I mean, they sell clothes about a third of the price of Gap, and it looks identical to Gap to me when you walk in. But if you look behind Uniqlo, you see a lot of really innovation, a little bit like 7-Eleven. They have a line of designer clothing called Plus J, designed by a designer named Jill Sanders. And it's just really an important thing for them. And people are attracted to the store to see the Plus J things. And they have a lot of other designers. They'll have a Madonna something or other that'll last for 2 months. So you have to get there in order to they just came out with Heat Tech, which is some clothing that keeps the heat inside. And it's just a dramatic breakthrough in clothing. And you think to yourself, why Uniqlo? I mean, why didn't LL Bean come out with that, or Bauer, or one of the big clothing companies? Why was it Uniqlo? But it was Uniqlo. They came out with a really dramatic innovation. And then there's energy. Another database is the BAV, Brand Asset Valuator database, developed by Y&R. And they have measured 40,000 brands over 44 countries, 70 metrics, 15 years. And one of their general findings that reported in their book, The Brand Bubble, is that brand equity is down everywhere. Trustworthiness is down 40%, quality perception down 24%, awareness down 20% over a 10 or 15-year period. Very disturbing. And actually, we find in the same thing in our database, that the overall metrics are declining down. However, there's an exception, and that's brands with energy. Brands with energy are breaking the mold. They are creating differentiation, they're creating preference, usage, they're driving stock return. So brands with energy, those 5% or 8% of brands that have energy, are behaving differently than the vast majority of brands. So with that, and we're finding the same thing in the Japan database. The brands with energy are skyrocketing. They're being very influential. So energy is really important, and most of these brands have energy. And by energy, I mean brands that are interesting, involving, innovative, that have enthusiasm, there's passion associated with them. And there's a couple of sources of energy. One is new products. That's sort of the best source of energy. And we talked about innovative products or innovative brands in Japan. But you can also have what I call energizers, branded energizers, and you can also get energy through advertising and promotion. So a concept I developed in the course of doing brand portfolio management work was the idea of a branded energizer, which is a sub-brand or brand that energizes and enhances a parent brand. A sub-brand or brand that enhances and energizes a parent brand. So you can have all kinds of them. You can have products, branded products, but you can also have promotion, endorsers, or basically any source of energy that you can attach to your brand. So the idea is, particularly if you have a boring brand and a boring category, if you make wieners or something, you're not going to get product energy. And but the trick is to find something with energy and attach your brand to it. That's the trick. I mean, my favorite example is the Avon Breast Cancer Crusade and the Avon Walk for Breast Cancer, and just think how much energy that's generated to the brand Avon. So if you look at the left, you see some branded products. Like Studio Ghibli has these animated movies, just like Pixar has toys and cars and so on. And Ponyo is their biggest hit movie of 2009, and that really has driven the Studio Ghibli brand. And then McCoffee has done wonders for McDonald's. I mean, it's provide a point of parity against Starbucks and a point of difference against Mr. Donut. It's provided a lot of energy for the McDonald's brand. But then you can have energizers that are not products, that are something else, but the brand has been able to put their name or name attached to it. So if you take Uniqlo, you have something they call Unique Clock, which is a web kind of music deal that has really captured the imagination of people in Japan. So they go to this web and it's a dance music kind of thing. And they have a very visible founder, Yanai, who's the founder and CEO of Uniqlo, and very out there kind of CEO. Gives them a lot of energy, gives them a lot of ability to communicate the vision. And then Rakuten is a internet shopping mall. It's a little bit like Amazon. It's just like going to a mall, but you're on the internet. And but they own a baseball team, and they sponsor the tennis tournament, the Japan Open, and they have another very visible CEO that gives them energy. And of course, Disney is the master at the branded energizer. You know, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, the Lion King, the Disneyland, which in my opinion was the greatest brand building event of all time, and Mary Poppins and so on. But you can also get energy from advertising and promotions, and that's one of the real successes of Nissan and Cup Noodle. They have this. They've always had this incredible advertising. They had the No Border series, first TV commercial taken from the universe. They tied up the most popular animation character, and then they had this "Beat the Cup Noodle" sort of mantra that, you know, let's all agree that Cup Noodle was the greatest innovation of our time, and we're going to beat it. And they use the most popular actor in. So they've just come out with a new noodle, one of their 250 products. It's a little fatter than other noodles. And here's an example of their ads. It's great density advertising. And this really great entertaining advertising has been with them for a long time. It's a noodle company. So anyway, just to recap, one of the things we've learned is just a vivid reminder about how stable strong brands are, and how much they're there. We can leverage them, and by the same token, how much it takes to build them. I mean, if somebody goes to tell you, some CEO comes to tell you, I want you to build a brand that vaults into this top category, well, good luck. I mean, it's like saying, how do I make a strong brand in the United States? Well, a good way would be to invent a light bulb 110 years ago, and invent a jet engine 60 years ago, and invent some appliances 40 years ago. That's how we get a really great brand. And so just to do it from scratch is a big problem. So what that means is if you have some legacy brands, you know, it might be a lot easier to revitalize them than to start over again. And then there's some reasons why we have strong brands. There's I talked about 6 themes. Branding is complicated, and for any individual brand, there's going to be a lot of complex reasons why it's strong. But these 6, I think, really kind of stand out at me as I look at this set of brands that are strong in Japan. Anyway, so thank you. We have some time for questions, don't we?
We do. We definitely do. First, let's thank you for the start here. Thank you, David. You have been energizing our brand for many decades, David.
Yeah,
we appreciate it. We appreciate it. We have time for some questions. Please use the microphones because we want to get it on tape here. If I may, I'll start with the first question, but please right up to the microphone if you have one. The question of Japan-specific versus general results. How do we think about how Japan these results are?
Well, in Japan, one difference in Japan is the corporate brand is really strong in Japan, and people want a relationship with a corporation, and the corporation has values, it has people, it has programs, and it's a heritage. So there's a lot of reasons that a corporate brand should be strong, but so you have a lot of anomalies, like Studio Ghibli is a strong brand, really strong brand in Japan. Pixar is not in the States, and they're just identical companies. And Pixar is a string of 8 blockbuster success movies, but it's not a particularly strong brand. And you have things like Suntory, which is a whiskey, and they put their brand on beer, and they put their brand on water. And of course, we would never do that here, but it's an organizational brand. So I think that's a major difference in Japan. In Japan, over time, they have really valued Western prestige brands. But that's kind of changed in the last 10 years. The functional brands have really become more valued in Japan, I would say. Yeah.
I noticed that you didn't put any weights on the different themes. So are they equal in their magnitude of effect, or was there a reason for that?
Well, it depends on the brand. So like I said, things like loyalty and visibility are more important with packaged goods because these people are drinking Suntory and they're eating cup noodle every day, a lot of them. But if you have something like Sharp, then innovation is more important. So it really depends on the sector. It depends on the brand. And this 6 dimensions it's kind of a gross generalization, frankly. So it's meant to be kind of stimulating rather than to reflect a causal model. Yeah.
You mentioned that Mooji has gotten into campgrounds. Can you explain what happens at the campgrounds and how they're using this to leverage their brand?
Well, I think that it's just an outgrowth of their fundamental belief that you want to be back to nature, you want to be natural, you want to be calm. My daughter did once a study of brand personality dimensions, and she did it in Japan. And in Japan, one dimension that does not appear is this John Wayne Western Clint Eastwood kind of dimension. But what does appear is the dimension of calmness. I mean, that's a personality dimension that comes out of research in Japan. And anyway, so it comes out of their whole philosophy, calmness, beigeness, functional, natural, back to nature, and have a link with nature. So it was sort of a natural thing for them to do. Or I wouldn't know if it's a natural thing, but it wasn't out of character for sure. And now they have 3 of these things, and so you go to these campsites, and it's just very natural, very Yosemite, very. There's no commercial, anything attached to it.
I realize that you have done the study more on the positive aspect of a brand, but if a brand has severe negative equity, does the same concept apply, and is it that much more difficult for a negative brand to break through and turn into a positive brand?
Well, 2 brands that had a lot of negatives were Microsoft and Walmart. And you take Walmart, at one time 8% of the people in the country said they would not shop at Walmart because their issues around the way they treat their employees, their suppliers, and so on. And 3 or 4 years ago, they started this environmental thing. And they had, and the most admired companies, I think they're number 12 now. Of course, that's, I think, in a business survey, not a consumer survey. But there's no question that they've neutralized that. There was an article out saying it's hard to hate Walmart because of the things they've done. So I think that's the most dramatic example I've seen of somebody that's been able to turn around a really strong negative and sort of dilute it. So, yeah, it's possible. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that commercial. I think it'll explain a lot of dancing in the courtyard here after. My question is about sort of the number of brands. I know like with globalization, you see a lot of global brands that are having reaches into places that they never would before. But then you also have, you know, the ability as an individual to create your own brand and expand there. So I was wondering if you were seeing consolidation or some type of fragmentation in the number of brands.
Well, for a long time, we've seen consolidation because, for one thing, branding, and it comes back to this silo business. Now, my Spanning Silos books, all these silos, we had control of branding, and they just went wild. And so companies would kind of wake up and say, we can't support all these brands. We can only support a handful of brands. So it became a combination of pruning the brand portfolio, and almost all companies have been doing that, and also setting priorities. You know, what are our strategic brands? And sort of relegating some other brands to being descriptors instead of really being brands. So yeah, there's a lot of that going on across the board, I think. And it has been for 5 or 7 years.
So you mentioned that the top 20 list of brands has been pretty stable over the past decade, except for Nintendo. The top 20 list of brands by financial performance has not been that stable. So I'm wondering what your views are on the correlation between the top brand and the top performing company.
Well, as I told you, I've done 5 or so studies relating brand equity to stock return or to ROI, and there's just no question that brand equity is a driver of stock return. It's got about, as I said, 60 or 70% of the effect of counting ROI. It's really a powerful, powerful effect. And but you know, when it comes to business performance, I mean, there's so many drivers of business performance that for an individual brand to look at one factor as a driver is really demanding, because there's so many things that can screw up. But, you know, we've known that for a long time as we try to figure out the effect of advertising. There's just so many things that can cause profitability. And you look at, as I mentioned, some of the strongest brands we have are Apple and Harley, and they went through a period, each of them, about 5 or 6 years, where the business really faltered. And it came out of it, and the brand was strong as ever. So it's really hard to figure out the causal situation in any specific context.
What advice do you have for some of us existing or soon-to-be brand managers in building brand equity, but on a very short 2-year rotation in many full-time jobs that we may have?
There was a commentary that somebody came to an advertising agency and a thing and said, you know, I want to have an iPod. And the advertising guy said, well, I'd like to have a Steve Jobs. And it reminds me a little bit, people used to say, I want to be Intel Inside. And I said, have you got $1 billion to spend on it a year? Well, no. So, you know, it starts with substance. You need to be in a situation where you're blessed with some really good, product vitality and so forth, because ultimately a brand is going to be based on substance. And even if you should, have a great, brilliant idea like the Avon Walk for Breast Cancer, it's going to be really 5-10 years before it really gets traction. And because a really good brand, a good program will build over a long period of time. So I think that if I was in a situation for 2 years, and incidentally, the really good brand companies now don't do this 2-year stuff anymore. But if I were in for 2 years, what I would do is try to demonstrate that I was making progress down the road to building a long-term brand asset.
We have time for one more. I will ask it if nobody has one. Oh, you have one. Please, sir. Come on. Yes.
So you mentioned that business performance or brand can withstand poor business performance. So could you share that in light of Toyota, right? So it's got a strong brand, but going through a terrible time right now. So do you think the brand can carry through the company just by the previous examples you cited, like Harley-Davidson, AT&T?
Yeah, I think Toyota will come back, but geez, I've been saying that for months, and it just keeps getting worse. And it's now become clear they've got an organizational problem. I have a friend, Hiro Takeuchi, that wrote a book on Toyota, and if you read that book, and you'd really admire that organization. And it talks about things how everybody's, gets to speak up. You can stop the assembly line, no matter who you are, and a lot of what you think this is really an organization, but now you get the impression they got some real organizational problems. These professional managers that took over from the family started cutting costs very aggressively, and this just-in-time system where we rely on a limited number of suppliers, and they rely on a limited number of suppliers. Well, you're only as good as your weakest link. And if something goes wrong, Nissan can say, well, your history, I'm going over another supplier. Well, it's not so easy for Toyota to do that. They're kind of locked in. And the suppliers hate them. And they don't, because they put all this, kind of a Walmart thing. They put all this pressure on suppliers. And so it just seems like they have to make some fundamental organizational changes. And that's not going to be so easy. But I think at the end of the day, they've got some really talented people in that organization, and I think at the end of the day that they'll eventually get it back. I don't know how long it'll take. However, what's been true for the last 10 years in the automobile industry is their competitors have, even though they've made cars comparable to Toyota's, have not been able to get their perceived quality up to the level of Toyota. So there's been a perception versus reality gap. And that ceiling is gone. So I think that when Toyota does get their reputation back, they're going to find there's no longer a reputation gap. That their competitors are, basically about where they are. So that's a bigger challenge, and that's going to be another really tough one for Toyota. How do you compete in a world in which you no longer are given this perceived quality gap that you've enjoyed? And so what they're going to have to do is to generate more Prius, breakthroughs. And they're going to have to generate some brands with personality, which they have not been able to do before. Even Lexus has suffered because it doesn't have a personality. Even when they changed their tagline, did you know, from the relentless pursuit of perfection to the passionate pursuit of perfection? Well, that wasn't enough. So anyway, it's a tough one, but that's my take on Toyota.
Our own Dave Aaker. Welcome home, Dave.